Welcome to episode 153 of the CUInsight Experience. This episode is brought to you by Allied Solutions. With over 40 years of experience in the financial service industry, Allied Solutions helps more than 4,000 clients grow or enhance their bottom line, protect their businesses, and cut consumers, and evolve to stay ahead of the competition. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and this show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement that make it so great. Today, I am having a conversation with Tammy Passafiume. Tammy is the president and CEO of Diamond Lakes Federal Credit Union in Arkansas. And let's just jump right in. Tammy, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be jumping in and seeing what this is all about.
Well, I was really excited to have you. You were referred to me by a good friend of mine, Caroline Willard, over at the Cornerstone League. So she said, you need to have Tammy on. So if there's anyone to blame, we're blaming Caroline, right? So
Noted.
So I'd like to start with a little bit of background for those that don't know you. Where'd your career start and how did that lead you to where you are today? You know, in credit unions, most of us didn't grow up going, someday I want to work in a credit union. So
Exactly. And my career actually started in credit unions. I was an insurance agent prior to this. And I had a good friend that worked at the credit union that would call me often to check on her members' insurance coverage with us. And she said, we have a position that, would you be interested? And that was one of those jobs. At the time I had little kids and it was 60 hours a week plus. And so I thought I'd look into it. Little did I know all these years later that we would still be working 60
That's 60 hours still a week. So let me ask you, when I was doing a little bit of homework for the show, was that first job, did you start as a teller or are you another one? Are you the teller to CEO?
Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. It seems like in credit unions, you hear about that so much more than other places, right? Where people started on the front line and then got the corner office, let's just say.
Especially as women in small credit unions, that seems to be the case. Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you remember the first time you said you worked in insurance? Do you remember the first time you heard of a credit union or knew what one was?
I didn't know what one was until after I interviewed. And I was already a member, actually. My husband worked for an international paper company, and we were already members of the credit union. And that was just where we had our account. And when I interviewed, my dad actually had the assumption that it was a savings and loan. He was like, are you sure you want to look at a job over there? Do you think that thing's going to last?
Yeah. Isn't that funny? Yeah. I've talked about it. I grew up in Metro Detroit, and I know I've mentioned it on the show before. There was people almost thought you had to be part of the union to be like the credit, that assumption of what are these things? Even like you said, you already belong to one, but so I find that interesting. Let's talk a little bit about credit unions. Biggest challenges right now that you see credit unions facing, in your opinion. And, I was interested to ask you about this because not only are you the CEO of your credit union, but you're also we mentioned that you're on the board of the Cornerstone League. You're on the board of other organizations around as well. So where's the struggle? What are we facing right now?
I'm going to refer back to Simon Sinek's and the infinite game. I think too many credit unions, we don't know the game that we're in. Diamond Lakes has been here for 60 years. And we're going to have to lead this organization so we do not run out of the will and the resources to survive. And if we're playing a finite game, we're not going to make it.
So what is the game? What are we missing today? I love that Simon Sinek quote, right? What is it that you think maybe most credit unions are missing today?
I think that sometimes that we try to chase after the next shiny thing. At our credit union, we say that we would like to be a fast follower. And then if we're going to fall fast and fall hard, and let's dust off and do it again. But we can't always be the newest shiny thing in the market, but we need to be the solid thing our members can count on.
You were speaking my language. I love the fast follower idea. And I think whether it's a small business like CUInsight or if it's credit unions in general, we're not the ones who are going to have all the endless dollars to do the research and create the new thing. But if we can follow behind afterwards, we'll be ahead of the game.
And build your circle. Know the people who are good at what they do and build your circle solid so you know who to go to when you're ready to do those kinds of things.
Absolutely. That's great advice. What has you most excited that you and your team at Diamond Lakes are working on? And for the credit union movement nationally, I meant to mention it earlier on the boards that you're on, also the Credit Union Women's Leadership Alliance. So a founding member of that as well. I always love to give a shout out there. So we've had many members on the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you for that, by the way. That is one organization I'm very excited about. And to tie it all together, not just for Diamond Lakes, but as for the industry, I believe coming out of COVID, we're coming out of it now, but we cannot have come out of it the way that we went in it. Our organization, we got with Angela Sibley and Personify Leadership, and we feel like that we have to be the ones to advocate for our members. We have to be the ones to fight for them when no one else will. So even our frontline, they're member advocates. They're not tellers. They're not MSRs. They're member advocates. And we have a program that's called For You, For Them. And Angela helped us do that. But what that is it's our promise to our team first. This is what we are committed to providing for you and advocating for you on these areas. And in turn, we have established goals. This is how we want you to advocate for our members. And I just see that in our whole industry. We have to fight for small credit unions and large credit unions, and we have to advocate for each other, whether it's locally or on the Hill.
Absolutely. I'd like to circle back there. I want to make sure that I understood what you were saying. When you talked about the direction or the way that the credit union is working, so like starting first with your team members, with the associates, like advocating for them as well. And then in turn, they'll advocate for the members. I think that is... Gosh, I was thinking about that, and I know there were some conversations around it earlier during the pandemic where it was like, yes, we're worried about our members, but our employees are members too. They're going through the financial struggles and everything, as well. So did I hear you correctly, or am I just making stuff up in my head?
No, you're not making it up at all. That's exactly what it is. It's personally at home. What does that look like? But it's also in the office, a set of standards. One of them is we collaborate, adapt, and change and support each other no matter the challenges. We've got to be agile. And the other one starts with we address conflicts respectfully and honestly, assuming the best of others. So we don't go into it that we assume that you've already gone down the wrong road here. We're going to assume that you started with the heart in the right place, and then we're going to go at it and see what we need to do from here.
So that's something I like to talk about generally later on in the show, but I want to do it right now. But so how do you create that space as the CEO where people, your team can walk in that door behind you and maybe speak truth to power, or not, like that you have that environment that like they know you're going to come at things with an open mind and that they have that space to talk and grow. And, you mentioned earlier, failing fast, right? Like to try things. It
has to start with me. And I can tell you one of the biggest challenges, and obviously we're talking, is learning when to keep your mouth shut and listen.
I struggle with that.
Yeah, it starts with an open door and your mouth closed first, and trying to get to the heart of it. And then one of the questions I asked often, we have leadership teams that meet every other week, and then our management team, we meet every week intentionally. And one of the questions that I lead with is, what do you need and how can I help? We've lost so many team members through COVID, and we all know that we're having staffing challenges. I'm a CEO of a small credit union. I can tell you I'm in the weeds right now, maybe a little further than a lot of CEOs are. But you know what? Those escrow accounts need to be tended to, and I've had some experience doing that. So we're doing that.
You're doing it. That is the small credit union CEO wears many hats. That's for sure. Let me ask you this. I mean, everything you're talking about now is sending me down so many rabbit holes, and these are kind of these scratch my own itch questions. When, you're talking about, I think institutions, most credit unions have seen some turnover over the past few years. It's kind of everywhere, right? When you're talking about creating that space and allowing people to come to you, is that something that you've always been good at? Or is it something that like you've had to learn over time? A lot of people who listen to the podcast would someday like to be sitting in your seat, right? Like maybe not yours specifically, but the CEO chair, let's just say. And I know a struggle that I had kind of coming up was being that kind of A-type leader that maybe brought me success, but that doesn't do well to lead teams necessarily and bring other people along. So is that something, have you always been good at that? Or is it something that you learned over time and experience in career?
Time and experience coming up in the organizations. Well, and I didn't start at Diamond Lakes. I started at another credit union, but coming up in, especially in that credit union where you become, now you're leading your peers. So what does that look like? Luckily, I was one of the people in that organization that people kind of naturally came to anyway, because I always wanted to be the person, again, what do you need and how can I help? And sometimes it's just listen. So I think part of that came naturally, but I think as you become CEO, unfortunately, you have to learn some boundaries, because you want to be that person, but at the end of the day, you're the one making the decisions.
We've talked about it a lot in the 5 years of the podcast, that often as a surprise to a first time CEO is that you become the buck stops with you. So I think that was something you said that had my mind going, was this idea of like, when you're promoted internally, you're now managing your peers. The buck does stop with you. But on the other side, when you go from maybe being a senior leader to the CEO, you also get a whole bunch of new bosses on the board side as well, right? Like you go from having one boss to 9 or 5 or 10 or whatever it happens to be. For that, senior credit union leader that's out there today, and maybe they're applying for, there's quite a bit of retirements happening in credit union land right now. For that person who's applying or wants to be the CEO someday, is there any, as someone who sits in the chair and has for a while now, is there any hacks that you, I guess, have come across and is on that transition of, managing your peers and suddenly having more bosses that you could share?
Don't build a wall for people that challenge you. I know too many times we assume that people challenge us, that they're against us. That's not the case most of the time. Most of the time it's they have differing opinions and views, and they just see things differently than you do. And working together with that, you can really grow. But you build those walls and you've got to uphill battle the rest of your career.
Right. Yeah. I've multiple friends of mine who have become CEOs. Now that getting older, people are becoming CEOs. That was the biggest surprise. Like they didn't realize, even though they presented to the board, or they didn't realize how much their CEO was actually shielding them on the day to day. And then, so do you have any tips as far as like building consensus? And, you've talked a lot about listening, welcoming the different opinions. When it comes to, you have the vision for what the credit union should be, bringing people along, whether it is your board or whether it's team members, to getting them so that everybody's kind of, let's just say, rowing in the same direction.
I think a lot of times challenges comes when you just don't provide enough information for them to make an educated decision. And if I'm guilty, oftentimes it's providing more information than they ever wanted to see. I've been accused of bringing them too far down in the weeds. They don't want that much. And I would rather be there and have them set that boundary. If you don't want to get down this low, I'm great with that. But I believe in transparency. I don't have anything to hide. One of the interview questions when I got this job was, do you have a problem if a board member talks to one of your employees? And I said, absolutely not. And we went on through the interview again, and he asked me again. He said, are you sure you wouldn't have a problem if we came in and sat down and wanted to have a conversation with one of your employees? And I said, I don't have a thing in the world to hide. If I'm treating my employees the way they should be treated, you come talk to them any day of the week. And that was shocking to me, that not only did they ask that once, but they needed to ask that twice. And that seems to be the case in the generation before me. There was a distinct line. There was a board member, and they did not get that far down in the weeds and have those conversations.
To me, it does seem like there's been an interesting transition in what we consider doing leadership well, from the old like GE Jack Welch days or whatever. It's a different environment today, right? And I think what us, even as employees, want to work with, right? Anyways, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, you mentioned earlier when we were talking about like the idea of, growing the credit union and having that circle around you. I kind of like to take it a step back because I know you work with many other leaders as a mentor as well. Can you talk about mentors, and have you had mentors in your life, and how did they help your career? And is it important to you as now a CEO and a leader in our movement to give back to that next group of CEOs as well?
They didn't necessarily have the title. I had great people that I learned from. Back then they didn't call them mentors. And then I would have people that I learned so much from that never intended to teach me anything. Maybe everybody's had those.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
But early on, not long after I became CEO, frankly, I went up to somebody that I was very intimidated by and just told them, I don't know how to do this, but I want to meet other people who know how to do this well. And that person was the CEO of a mega-sized credit union. We were at that time a $24 million credit union. And he said, I know somebody who can help you. And he introduced me to Teresa Mann. You may know Teresa.
I know that name, yeah.
DC area, used to be the board chair for the league there. Fantastic relationship over the years. Very innovative. She was running a small credit union in DC. She actually was running the credit union for the FDIC. So.
Right. I love those type of credit unions. That's so great.
But oddly enough, I've gone to people who challenged me and asked for advice I didn't necessarily like getting over the years. But yes, I've had some unwitting mentors. And this weekend I had an opportunity, and it makes me want to tear up. One of the ladies that I used to work with at River Valley, and I hired her after I was CEO there. She's an author now, still works at the credit union, published author, and she had a book signing this weekend. And I was just so proud. I felt like I was just like a proud mama walking up there. And I think we're actually the same age. She may even be a little older than I am. And she turned to her friend and introduced me. She said, "This is Tammy from River Valley. She hired me way back when, and she kept me when I was not fit. But she will never know how much she taught me."
Beautiful. Wait,
yeah.
Do you remember the name of her book? Can we give her a shout out and put it in the show notes here?
Kingdom Pieces.
Okay.
Kingdom Pieces. It can be found on Tamala Winfrey. Books A Million, Amazon. It's out there. Yeah.
We'll give her that shout out, and maybe a few folks will buy her book. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about like your network. I mean, everything that you've just been talking about speaks to that. Who do you surround yourself with today? Boy, I'll tell you, you've already mentioned it, I think, a couple times, but having those people in our network who are willing to push back or give us the tough love, I've found over my career that when I look back, they're almost, the pats on the back are great, but that other side is so valuable in the growth and the learning, right? So who does Tammy surround herself with?
Well, and another thing that I've learned too is I needed to diversify my network a little bit. I had credit union land. I've been involved with the league all of these years. I love it. I have a solid circle there. CUNA school classmates of mine. We still get together at least every other year. I can still reach out to them anytime with questions, concerns. My CULA founders and group, they are fantastic. One of the favorite questions that we had right as COVID started from one of the other CEOs is, how do I know when I just need to throw in the towel? And you just circle around each other and pick one another up. But the other people I surround myself with is my church family, solid circle there. And I have to go to a large church here in Hot Springs. So there are other community leaders that have their relationship solid, and they can lift me up in that way, and we can do the same for each other. It's been important. And then I'm on the economic development board, and the intermodal authority is interesting. I'm not sure how I ended up there, but we talk about railroads and roads and water systems and all those things too.
That's fascinating. It's interesting. You mentioned your church family and, people outside of credit unions. Sometimes we need that, like someone outside the bubble to take a look at it. I remember when Maurice Smith was on the podcast early on, and he talked about, like, he used to go to his dad, who had nothing to do with financial services, but just like, it was almost that, like, if it doesn't make sense there, maybe are we trying to convince ourselves of something, right? So
yes,
it's a beautiful thing to learn. What's the greatest investment, like, you feel that you've made in your career? And the example I always give is Warren Buffett said it was a Dale Carnegie course.
Well, and actually, when I was still an insurance agent, Harold Campbell owned the agency. And that was one of the first career building things I did, was 2 Dale Carnegie courses.
Was it really? Yep.
One of my favorite books is, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right?
Yeah.
And then I did another management one as well, but CUNA school and DE. Yeah. I'm a DE.
Yes. We always give a shout out to DE. So
yeah.
That's fantastic. We are working the entire CUInsight team through DE. I think we have 2 or 3 people left. So
I would advise going when there's not snow on the ground.
I went the only year they held it in Dallas, so I did not have to worry about Madison snow. So
it was beautiful, but
oh, absolutely. But I agree with you. Summer, and I'm so happy to see the DE experience back in person, because I think that you mentioned, CUNA Management School and DE, those bonds you form during that. They last a lifetime, right? Like, it's still, GAC is coming up, and everybody, those people from my DE class, every time we see each other, you almost beeline across the hall or whatever, right? Just because there's that connection.
And I firmly believe that those relationships that I built, they are the reason that I'm on the league board the way I am, and I have the position that I have. It's those relationships and those people that have believed in me along the way, inside and outside of the credit union movement. I wouldn't be here without them.
Absolutely. I love it. A question about leadership. And when you're building your team, is there something that you look for when you're bringing, say, somebody onto that management team that's going to be in the circle helping drive the credit union forward? And on the flip side of that, when you're interviewing and going through that process, is there something that just shuts you down, where you're like, that's not happening, you wouldn't fit here?
On my team, raising somebody up is, how do they lead, how they make decisions in the gray areas? Because sometimes the answer is yes, and which one is the best one? The hard no's are the easy decisions to make, right?
Right.
But that's what I'm looking for internally, and to be sure that they have not crossed the line that would ever make me question their integrity.
Question for you about the gray areas. So I absolutely love that. So with the size credit union you're at, and quite honestly, with the biggest credit union out there, we can't do everything, right? So when there are 2 yeses, the no's, like you said, are easy. It's like, no, we don't have to do that. But when there are multiple yeses, or there's, like, you're sitting there and maybe it's in strategic planning, you're like, we'd love to do this, and this. We can't. We just can't do it all. How do you have a process to, let's just say, increase the odds of picking the best yes?
Well, first of all, it's not just my decision. It's my entire team and my board, because I do invite people with different opinions and views to come in on that. But the other thing is, Teresa Mann told me, anything you're going to start, as to what end? Is it sustainable? Why? For instance, we have Zelle as one of our products now. It's not inexpensive to have that. Why did we need to do that? Because our members are having so much cash out fraud, we had to provide something. And is it sustainable? Can you afford it? Those kinds of questions.
So let me ask the flip side of that. You mentioned it early on as in our conversation about, also that kind of that fail fast, mentality also. One of the things that I know I struggled with was when to kill a project. It seemed like a great idea. You're invested in it, but like how to pull the string. We only have limited resources to go focus someplace else. Any tips there as far as you mentioned, what are we doing it for? If it's not living up to that, have you picked up anything along the way that maybe to help know when to pull the plug also?
To be honest, no. I haven't arrived there yet.
Difficult thing.
I haven't arrived there yet. Now, I'm a lot easier on projects than I am people. For instance, audio response. When do we say that we're not doing that anymore? And then you pull all the data and you see, well, that's going to affect 50% of your membership if you decide that you don't want to do it anymore because you think it's a dinosaur. You look and see who it matters to.
Right.
And then you make those decisions on where to go from there. If it matters to 10 people and you have 10,000, maybe you can do a mailing or talk to those even 10 people. You can call them on the phone and say, this is why the service doesn't make sense anymore. And I want to let you know. But I'm a data person. Get me the numbers.
You see the numbers. That makes sense. What makes in your mind, what makes a good CEO or a great CEO today? Knowing
that you're building an organization that needs to live past you and your time there.
That's beautiful and true, right? That is the big one. There was a question, I mentioned earlier that you're on multiple boards. I'd love to ask you this question because I always find league boards as being this interesting thing for the CEOs. My fiance, Jill, was league president of Connecticut before she started Humanity. And, so I got to see it single-handedly. But the interesting part for me is that it's generally a board of CEOs. So you've got CEOs as the board, but in general, you mentioned also you're on many, some of the community boards and stuff. What makes a good board member?
Supporting the one person that you employ.
Yep.
We count on that person to lead that organization. Our role is also, we lead the organization too, but we've got to support that person to do their job. And if we're doing more to tear that person down, we're just tearing our whole organization down with that person.
Absolutely. Earlier on, we mentioned the pandemic a little bit, but one of the things that I think has changed since then is what the workforce expects, I guess I would say. And like you said, we can't go backwards. What do you think a career in credit unions looks like as we move forward for maybe this spring when somebody's graduating from college and they're starting their first job at Diamond Lakes? What does a career in credit unions look like over the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
I'm going to refer back, Lily B. Farmer.
Yeah, absolutely. Lily's been on the show.
I think a lot of that depends on the person and the size of the credit union, the size of the organization. She talks to a lot of people, and I talk to a lot of people that are looking, when I say, quote, career with air quotes around it. If you're in a small credit union, you will have more opportunities to diversify. It's kind of like going to medical school. You'll get to practice a little bit here and you get to practice a little bit there. And at the end of the day, you'll get to see where your heart is. And then maybe you can move on to a large organization that you just want to do marketing or you just want to do lending. But I think we're really going to have to, if you're coming into a credit union and you want a career, one of the questions I ask is, what was the last thing you did kind for someone that was not related to work? And if you want to survive in a small credit union, you got to have the heart for
it. Absolutely, that is for sure. This is something that, gosh, it's interesting because I'm thinking of conversations that I had with Lily, and I had a thought from when Linda Bodie was on the show. As a smaller credit union CEO, how do you not only, and I always love these conversations as somebody who started a small business in CUInsight, right? Is this idea of how do you, with limited resources, keep pushing the bar forward, but also making sure that you don't have thousands of people on your team, right? Every person in the credit union is extremely important. And so their growth is to the credit union, right? How do you to move the credit union forward, to keep the credit union relevant in a very fast-paced financial services industry? How do you make sure that the folks on your team actually have the opportunity to continue to grow and to stay relevant as well? Professionally relevant. They're always relevant, right? But professionally relevant as well.
At spending a lot of time in that, what do you need and how can you help? I don't have all the answers. I need smart people around me. And if this is your niche, how can I pour into that? Because I promise you things will occur to them that will never occur to me. And I've got to see them grow.
Before we move on to the rapid fire questions and wrap this conversation up, is there anything that you were hoping I was going to ask you that I haven't?
No, I shared at the first of it that I was nervous anyway. So I was probably had more things I was hoping you wouldn't ask than you asked.
Oh, and you've done fantastic. You can always tell there's video. If I'm smiling the entire time, it means I'm having a good time. That means that I know that the listeners are going to love this too. So anyways, I appreciate you so much. So it wouldn't be the CUInsight Experience without a little fun, some rapid fire questions. So here we go. And to be clear, your answers don't have to be rapid. Just the questions are. So what was the first job you ever had?
Cleaning houses.
Oh, nice. All right. Like in high school or out of high school, or was it?
In high school, I tried babysitting twice. Although I have raised 6 children. That was not for me.
You just didn't want other people's kids, eh? That's amazing. When was the last time you were amazed, either personally or professionally?
Last weekend.
What amazed you?
Going to Tammy's book signing and seeing how much she's grown since then and just how God's using her.
Oh, that is beautiful. Is there anything about yourself that you're currently working on? What's taking up that personal growth space?
Being intentional with the time with my family. I only have one of my children that live nearby. All of the rest of mine live away. And more intentional about making memories.
Yeah. Memories are important. So you mentioned family, and this leads right into this question. You just set me up perfectly. One of the things I've found with CEOs and leaders of organizations in general is oftentimes the organization can consume us to the detriment of family and personal relationships. You just mentioned you got a big, beautiful family that's spread out all over the place. What have you lived and learned along the way to create that balance that you could share with others?
I've not arrived at that yet.
Still working at it, eh?
All of my people will tell you that I'm a workaholic. I also believe that my joy is my job.
Yeah.
But they also know that it brings me a lot of joy to do what I do here. So I haven't arrived at that yet, because I do find so much joy in what I do. And, you do this, you've interviewed a lot of credit union CEOs, and we serve on boards. We do a lot of volunteer gigs.
Absolutely.
But, oh my goodness, the joy that I get from that. And now we've gotten to a place in our life where my family comes along with me. My husband's coming with me to GAC. So I don't know that I've learned to balance the two. I'm just bringing them along.
You're just bringing them along with the credit union. So, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received? And do you remember who gave it to you?
I was thinking about this when I saw it on the list. And one of the ones I just said is that my joy is my job. And I actually heard that in a Stephen Furtick sermon. And the other one was from a Bible study teacher of mine that told me that, Tammy, no is a complete sentence.
Yes. That's a tough one to pick up, but it makes life smoother, I feel. This is more, again, fun probably just for me, but I love asking it. Is there anything you're unreasonably thrifty on, let's just say?
Unreasonably thrifty.
Maybe your husband would be like, you're unreasonably thrifty on that, or cheap on that, let's just say. So
No, I can't really think of anything I'm unreasonably thrifty on, I have to admit. I do look at things like we're getting ready to remodel our house. And I do look at things like, can I do it first? Is it something I can?
Yep. If you could do it, why pay for it?
I resolved to hire a painter, but I can't.
Time's worth something too, right? What's the greatest album of all time? That one you could listen to every song on. Well,
and I have to admit, I don't have a favorite album. I'm going to go back to my CUNA school classmates, Good Old Journey, and Don't Stop Believing. It's a favorite song.
Don't Stop Believing.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Is there something you're reading or that book that you think everybody should read?
The one that I just went back to is Joseph Baracco. He's from Harvard School of Business.
Okay.
It's a few years back. The name of the book is called Questions of Character. He also wrote the book about, I think it's called Leading in the Gray.
Okay.
That one you may remember. This one takes other literary works, novels, and breaks down the leadership styles in them.
That sounds fascinating.
what it is fascinating, and one of the things that, and again, we talked about earlier, anything that has happened that makes me question someone's character on my team, I'm concerned about. And this book and these leaders, some of them you have the answer to the yes and yes. And when did you take a chance on a person? One of them is even the death of a salesman. Do I have a good dream?
Yeah.
That's when I've gone back to now. And I refer folks to that one often.
That's fantastic. When you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind and why?
His name is Cheryl Schroeder. I actually, not anybody that you would probably know. This gentleman is now in his 80s and solid Christian man that I go to church with, and actually ended up, was a general manager of a cable company for many years. People would call him financially successful, but more than that, he just has a peace and a spirit about him that you just can't find from a job. He is successful because he knows where his joy is and where it comes from.
I love that. It's still after 5 years, we're into the 5th season. It's still my favorite question because we all define success differently, right? So, but I absolutely love it. There you go. Tammy, thank you so much for being on the show. You mentioned you'll be at GAC. I hope our paths cross there. We get to see each other in person soon. If people have additional questions of you, what's your poison? What's the best way to get a hold of you? LinkedIn, email? How do you like people to reach out?
I am on LinkedIn. Email, my credit union's Tammy P at diamondlakesfcu.org.
We will put that in the show notes as well. So thank you again for being here today, Tammy, and I look forward to our paths crossing.
Thank you.
A few things before we go. Make sure to check out our sponsor, Allied Solutions, in the show notes and see how you can leverage their 40 years of experience to help protect and grow your credit union. They're a longtime partner of CUInsight.com and the podcast, and I'm grateful for their support because they allow me to have this much fun doing what I do. Please also subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We're on them all. And if you're looking for a book mentioned, like the one Tammy mentioned, a quick Google of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and your next read can be on its way from Amazon. Last but certainly not least, I want to thank all of you for listening. Y'all rock. I appreciate the kind words that come in. GAC's coming up. Can't wait to see everybody. Be well, friends. See you soon.